"Don't come back here because my girlfriend and I are going to live in this house," he said, putting his arm around his mistress as if to emphasize their relationship. I recalled the moment my sister's husband had revealed the affair to me. Despite my initial hesitation about divorce, witnessing my husband's behavior during our daughter's hospitalization shattered any remaining love I had for him. He hadn't visited our daughter even once in the hospital, leaving me to handle everything alone while he took advantage of my absence to spend time with his mistress in our home. I had taken time off from my part-time job and was exhausted from running between the hospital and home. Instead of supporting me during this difficult time, he was flaunting his new relationship and demanding I stay away from our own house. I was forced to clean up after my husband and his mistress, who dared to tell me not to come back home. Exhausted and unable to argue any longer, I quickly packed my things and returned to the car where my sister and her husband were waiting. As I left, my husband and his mistress laughed at me. In the car, I shared what had happened with my sister and her husband. They were ready to confront my husband, but I stopped them. I didn't want my daughter to witness a scene like that, so I asked them to take us to my parents' house instead. We found a warm welcome there, and my daughter gradually improved while staying with my parents. From the time our daughter started crawling, my husband seemed only concerned about cleanliness and rarely interacted with her. His affection for her was fleeting, and she likely doesn't have many memories of him being loving or attentive. She never expressed a desire to see her father or mentioned feeling lonely. I didn't have the energy to confront my husband when I left our house, but I couldn't let things continue like this. Now that my daughter was recovering and could return to kindergarten, I started to consider what to do about my husband. One day, I got a call from him. Curious about what he wanted to say, I answered. He bluntly told me, "The house is dirty. Come back and clean it." Even though he should have been living there with his affair partner, it seemed like neither of them did any housework. My sister had mentioned she was young and likely hadn't lived on her own before, leaving household chores to her family. It was absurd for my husband, who had told me not to return, to now demand that I come back just to clean. His request struck me as incredibly selfish. I declined his request in disbelief. "You should clean your own house, or maybe that girl you're having an affair with can do it," I retorted, hanging up the phone. Despite my husband's persistent calls afterward, I ignored him. I could only imagine his frustration on the other end. Unsure of what would happen next, later that night, after putting my daughter to bed with the help of my parents, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard a commotion at the front door. Curious, I went to investigate. As I opened the door, I was shocked to see my husband and his affair partner standing there, completely soaked in red. Behind them, my sister and her husband, along with my in-laws, stood with stern expressions, ensuring they couldn't escape. My husband and his affair partner apologized, saying, "We are truly sorry." However, my sister, her husband, and my in-laws didn't accept their apology. What covered them from head to toe was not blood but tomato juice. After my husband had called me to clean the house, I immediately informed my sister, her husband, and my in-laws about it. My sister and her husband visited my husband first, while my in-laws, who lived nearby, drove over to his place. My sister and her husband tricked my husband into going to the garden, pretending they needed some gardening tools I owned. When he turned his back, they pelted him with tomatoes. Startled, he turned around, only to have more tomatoes thrown at his face. These tomatoes were overripe and very soft, sourced as waste from a farm owned by a relative of my sister's husband. They wouldn't have caused much physical pain upon impact, but their squishy insides splattered easily, which affected my husband, who prized cleanliness. My sister and her husband didn't give him a chance to react and continued throwing tomatoes. The tomatoes not only hit my husband but also splattered against the pristine white walls of the house, causing chaos. As this unfolded, my in-laws arrived on the scene. My husband was now being bombarded with tomatoes by my sister, her husband, and my in-laws. Amidst his panic screams and flailing, his affair partner, curious about the commotion, appeared in the garden. Without hesitation, she too became a target for the tomatoes. Attempting to flee back inside, she was forcefully pulled back out by my sister and ended up running alongside my husband in the garden. I overheard everything well on the phone from the moment my sister and her husband showed up at my husband's place. Every time the walls outside got dirty, my husband would scream sadly, and his affair partner would join in, crying and panicking. Eventually, my sister, her husband and my in-laws, threw all the tomatoes they had brought by then. The two of them had calmed down completely. They were then walked to my parents' house nearby. Even though I can never forgive what my husband and his lover did, hearing my husband's pitiful voice and the lover's cries made me feel a bit better. It was almost funny to see them both so desperate, apologizing to me. My sister's husband came up with this plan after my daughter left the hospital. I began to doubt my husband's behavior during her stay. I decided to set up the baby monitor we used when she was little in our bedroom. I suspected that if my sister's husband was right, my husband might have been bringing his lover to our house while our daughter and I were away. I was anxious that the hidden baby monitor concealed near a houseplant would be discovered at any moment. Fortunately, neither my husband nor his lover found it, and it captured everything they did since the day my daughter was in the hospital. It seemed like my husband was living with his lover at our house part-time. Each time I returned home, I saw the recorded footage as proof. After my daughter left the hospital, and I confirmed my husband's affair, I confided in my sister and her husband about the video evidence and sought their advice on what to do next. They suggested involving my in-laws first. My in-laws live about a 30-minute drive away and are usually calm people, unlike my husband, who often gets angry. So, with my sister and her husband, I took the evidence to my in-laws' house. At first, they found it hard to believe that their son could cheat. However, when we showed them the footage, they saw undeniable proof of my husband being intimate with his lover. They had no choice but to believe me. What's worse, my husband was heard saying hurtful things about our daughter, like how she just makes a mess and isn't cute at all, and that he wanted to throw both her and me out. This revelation made my in-laws furious. They wanted to confront my husband immediately, but my sister, her husband, and I convinced them to hold off for the moment. When my husband found out I knew about the affair, he became defiant. We didn't want to give in to his wishes for a quick divorce, so we discussed with my in-laws how to come up with a fitting punishment. Seeing the evidence on the video, my in-laws were also deeply hurt and immediately agreed to our plan. After brainstorming together, we decided on a unique punishment: throwing tomatoes at him. This idea came from my sister's husband, who had studied in Spain and was inspired by the tomato festival there. We thought it would be satisfying because my husband dislikes getting dirty and throwing tomatoes wouldn't cause any harm. It was also convenient timing, since my sister's husband's relatives, who are farmers, had an excess of tomatoes that were going to be discarded. Initially, I was taken aback by the unusual idea, but I soon realized that simply throwing tomatoes wouldn't suffice. I felt my husband deserved to experience some discomfort from being hit by tomatoes, so I agreed to the plan. My sister, her husband, and my in-laws were all set to carry it out. I wanted to join in throwing tomatoes at my husband as well, but I was still concerned about my daughter's well-being and couldn't leave my parents' house. Additionally, my sister and her husband felt guilty for introducing me to my husband, and my in-laws felt responsible for how they raised their son, so it was decided that the four of them would proceed with the plan without me. I made sure they promised to do it outside the house, not inside. Despite my disappointment at not being able to throw tomatoes myself, witnessing my husband and his lover in such a pitiful state thanks to my family was oddly satisfying. I had already informed my parents about my husband's affair, so when they were brought to my parents' house, they were visibly uneasy. I threw the divorce papers at my husband without looking him in the eye and said firmly, "Let's get divorced. I have all the evidence of your affair. You'll also need to pay child support." Upon hearing the mention of child support, the lover reacted with disbelief. It seemed she had been imagining marrying my husband, becoming a housewife, and living comfortably. Realizing that child support payments could burden her financially, she began denying any involvement, claiming, "I have nothing to do with this man." That's when I mentioned the footage from the baby monitor. At this point, the lover argued that it was an invasion of privacy, and my husband backed her up, threatening legal action against me. However, my in-laws, along with my sister and her husband, scolded them harshly. Still shaking from the tomato incident, both of them fell silent quickly. When I reiterated to my husband that he needed to agree to the divorce, he reluctantly began to complain. "I've been supporting you all this time, and as a housewife, you should obey your husband. You can't even clean properly. You were a useless wife. It's only natural that I cheated on you," my husband sarcastically remarked, mocking the idea of a part-time working mother being able to support herself. However, there was a reason why I decided to return to my parents' house this time. It wasn't just because my parents and my sister and her husband welcomed me back, but also because I was offered a full-time position at my part-time job. When I informed my husband about this opportunity, he clicked his tongue in frustration. That's when I made it clear to him that my daughter and I would never return to that house again. Predictably, my husband started complaining about who would clean the walls of the house, but ultimately it was his infidelity that caused all of this, and he was entirely at fault. When he demanded that I pay for cleaning the exterior, my in-laws had had enough. They disowned him right then and there for bringing up such trivial matters at this point. After being disowned by his in-laws, my husband unexpectedly proposed to his mistress. Covered in tomato and feeling humiliated, she had lost all affection for him, and the idea of paying child support added to her rejection. She bluntly told my husband, "I'm not interested in a man without money," leaving him stunned under our stern gazes. My husband reluctantly agreed to our divorce. We informed them that we would continue discussions through our lawyers, and then we sent my husband and his mistress away. I'm not sure what they discussed on their way back, but apparently, they ended up angrily arguing and parted ways, cursing each other out afterward. My husband ended up living alone in our house, struggling to manage the mortgage and child support payments on his own. He tried seeking help from his brother but was coldly turned away and cut off from his family. Now he had no one left to rely on. Meanwhile, the mistress faced repercussions from the rumors about her relationship with my husband. She ended up quitting her job, and when her affair was discovered by her parents, they disowned her just like my husband's family did to him. She was kicked out of her parents' home and now lives in a cheap run-down apartment. During the day, she works part-time, and at night, she works in a nightclub to make ends meet. My sister once spotted the mistress working at a store's register and remarked how much weight she had lost and how aged she looked, despite being in her early 20s. It's heartbreaking to think about how a single mistake could dramatically alter someone's life and rob them of so many potential happy moments. As for me, I've started working full-time with the support of my parents, sister, and her husband, who welcomed me back to their home. It's challenging at times, but I'm beginning to feel a sense of achievement as I take on more responsibilities at work. My daughter has settled into living with my parents and is thriving each day. When we lived with my husband, she struggled to get along with adult men, likely due to his yelling. Now, she's gradually overcoming that thanks to the kindness shown by my sister's husband and my father. Surrounded by a caring family, my daughter and I are now enjoying a peaceful and happy life. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.